I want to bring in Sam Wilkin. He's a Middle East analyst with Control Risks, offering consultation and business risks throughout the region. We're going to get to Washington shortly, but your first take on knowing this region as you do and looking at the impact that the US president's words might have on a military who seem to be all out and determined in Egypt to do their own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you discussed earlier, it's an important relationship between the US and Egypt, and it works both ways. And successive Egyptian governments have relied on the relationship with the US, and even the Brotherhood government was willing to work with the US. And I think that demonstrates how important that relationship is. Equally, as we've discussed, from the US side, it's important to maintain its influence in Egypt. So what we're going to see is a bit of back and forth negotiation and just trying to find an acceptable solution from the US standpoint, trying to drive forward the political discourse and avoid the polarization that we're seeing. Of course, that's a difficult task now after yesterday's events. They marked a clear escalation from what we've seen before, with at least 500 dead and probably many more. And then today a reprisal, as you mentioned at the beginning of the piece, with several Brotherhood members storming government offices, which they hadn't done before.
This is incredibly important, as we've heard from the US president today, and we expect and hear that they are reviewing and assessing the $1.5 billion in aid that comes on an annual basis from the US. We also have to assess the influence of the regional powers here, not least the UAE, where we stand today, the Saudis, the Qataris, and for example, the Kuwaitis. How do you read sort of tectonic shifting plates, as it were?
Thanks, Becky. Well, obviously, this is a time of great instability for Egypt, and it's going to be incredibly difficult to know how it's going to play out, and whether in 6 months' time we'll have a military government in place, or a counter-revolution with the Brotherhood, or something in between those things, a sort of inclusive government. So states are going to be quite hesitant to give aid to any one particular group or the other, I would imagine. But certainly Egypt does rely heavily on foreign aid for its economic survival.
So aid is one thing, condemnation and words are another thing at this point. Let's have a listen to what was the statement or the sound from the Turkish Prime Minister, and then we'll talk about that coming up.
Batılı ülkelere açık açık sesleniyorum.
I am calling on Western countries. You remain silent in Palestine, Gaza. You remain silent in Syria. 100,000 people lost their lives, and you are still remaining silent. 400,000 people are seeking refuge in Turkey and still remaining silent. You are still silent on Egypt. So how come you talk about democracy, freedom, global values, and human rights?
Now, Turkey was a supporter of the Morsi administration. No surprise that it would be outrightly condemning what it's seen by the military. But you've had other regional players also condemning. Those who haven't have hardly said anything. What do you think when you hear these words from Turkey?
Well, I think there's two sides to this coin, and firstly, it does reflect Turkey's interests and its support for the Muslim Brotherhood. But equally, there's clearly been a very dramatic incident yesterday in which soldiers attacked largely peaceful and unarmed protesters and killed more than 500 people. And that, on its own merit, means that countries are going to speak out. And we've seen a lot of European countries as well condemn these actions very strongly. Some of the ambassadors, the UN and the EU has also spoken out. So this is a really major diplomatic event that's developing.